Welcome back to another deep dive into the world of the greatest detective to ever live. Today we are exploring a case that starts with a simple bicycle ride but ends in a high-stakes drama of greed, kidnapping, and a very unexpected hero. This is the story of the solitary cyclist, one of the most atmospheric adventures from the return of Sherlock Holmes. Our story begins at 221B Baker Street, where a young woman named Violet Smith arrives, seeking the advice of Sherlock Holmes. Violet is a talented music teacher whose life took a sudden and dramatic turn after the death of her father, left with very little money. She and her mother were struggling to make ends meet until two men arrived from South Africa with news that would change everything. These two men, Mr. Carruthers and Mr. Woodley, claimed to have known Violet's uncle Ralph Smith, who had passed away in poverty in South Africa, or so they said. Carruthers, who appeared to be the more gentlemanly of the two, offered Violet a position as a music teacher for his young daughter at his country estate in Surrey. The salary was incredibly generous, far more than any music teacher could expect to earn at the time. Despite the oddness of the situation, Violet accepted the job. However, life at the estate of Charlington Heath wasn't as peaceful as she had hoped. While Mr. Carruthers was kind, his friend Mr. Woodley was a complete nightmare. Woodley was a loud, aggressive, and frankly repulsive man who made constant, unwanted romantic advances toward Violet. Things got so bad that even Carruthers had to intervene to protect her. But the real mystery, the one that brought Violet to Holmes, started on her weekend trips to the train station. Every Saturday, Violet would cycle from the estate to the station to visit her mother in London. On a lonely stretch of road bordering the woods, she noticed she was being followed. A man on a bicycle would appear behind her, keeping a specific distance. He never tried to speak to her or harm her, but he was always there, dressed in a dark suit and wearing a beard. As soon as she reached the more populated areas, he would simply vanish. Naturally, this creeped her out, and when she told her employer, he didn't seem to take it seriously. Holmes is immediately intrigued. He loves a mystery that seems small on the surface but hints at something much darker beneath. However, he is busy with another case, so he sends the ever-faithful Dr. Watson down to Surrey to keep an eye on things. Watson, trying his best to be a detective, observes the road and sees the solitary cyclist just as Violet described. He tries to get a good look at the man, but the cyclist is too clever and disappears into the grounds of a neighboring property called Charlington Hall. When Watson reports back to Baker Street, Holmes is characteristically unimpressed. He teases Watson for not checking the local pub or investigating the history of the neighboring house. Holmes decides it is time to take matters into his own hands. He heads down to Surrey himself and ends up in a local inn where he encounters the infamous Mr. Woodley, true to form. Woodley starts a fight, but as we know, Holmes is quite the boxer. He returns to London with a bruised knuckle but a lot more information. It turns out that Woodley and a disgraced priest named Williamson are staying at Charlington Hall, and they are up to no good. The plot thickens when Violet writes to Holmes saying that her situation has become unbearable. Mr. Carruthers has proposed marriage to her, and when she rejected him, the atmosphere in the house turned sour. She decides to leave her position for good. Holmes and Watson rush to Surrey on the day she is supposed to depart, fearing that something terrible is about to happen. As they arrive at the lonely stretch of road, they find a carriage, but it is empty. Violet has been abducted. Just as they are searching for clues, the mysterious solitary cyclist appears again, but this time he is frantic. He reveals himself to be none other than Mr. Carruthers in disguise. He admits that he has been following Violet to protect her from Woodley and Williamson. It turns out that the story about the uncle dying in poverty was a lie. The uncle had actually become incredibly wealthy, and Woodley and Carruthers had traveled from South Africa with a plan to get their hands on that fortune. Their plan was simple yet devious. One of them would marry Violet to secure the inheritance. They had even played cards to see who would get the first chance to woo her. Woodley won the game, but he was so repulsive that Violet wouldn't have him. Carruthers, who was supposed to be the accomplice, actually fell in love with her and decided to protect her from the much more dangerous Woodley. Holmes, Watson, and Carruthers rush to the grounds of Charlington Hall, where they find a scene straight out of a gothic horror novel. In the middle of the woods, Woodley and the defrocked priest Williamson are forcing Violet into a sham marriage ceremony. Woodley is gloating, believing he has finally secured his wealth, but Carruthers, consumed by guilt and love, pulls out a revolver and shoots Woodley. The wound isn't fatal, but it stops the villain in his tracks. Holmes calmly takes control of the situation, pointing out that the marriage ceremony is legally worthless because it was performed under duress and by a priest who had lost his license. The villains are rounded up and handed over to the police. In the end, Violet Smith is safe. She eventually inherits the fortune she never knew she had, and Carruthers, despite his criminal beginnings, serves a prison sentence and eventually seeks redemption. It is a classic Holmes case because it reminds us that things are rarely what they seem. The man following you in the shadows might not be the villain. He might be the only thing standing between you and a much greater danger. Holmes' ability to see through the greed of men and the complicated nature of the human heart is what makes these stories timeless. The Solitary Cyclist is a perfect example of how a simple bicycle ride can lead to a tangled web of international crime and secret legacies. It also shows us a more human side of the characters involved. Even a man who sets out to commit a crime can be changed by genuine affection. Though, as Holmes would point out, that doesn't excuse his initial participation in the plot. Justice is served, the lady is saved, and Baker Street remains the center of the world's most fascinating investigations. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Surrey countryside with Holmes and Watson. There is always something new to discover in these old cases, and the atmosphere of the lonely road and the silent rider is something that stays with you long after the story ends. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the Solitary Cyclist, make sure to let me know. There are so many more of these incredible stories to tell, each with its own unique twist and turn. Thanks for watching, and remember to follow for more deep dives into the greatest mysteries ever written. See you in the next one.